Javed Bajwa is Pakistan's army chief and he supervises a very powerful army, and now it is being learnt. The General Bajwa has a doctrine that he's come up with, and that doctrine, dear viewers, is behind the bloodshed at the India-Pakistan border for the last several months. Now, the Bajwa doctrine is, to put it simply, is about displacing Indian villages. Unfortunately, to have a neighbour like Pakistan, it is the Bajwa doctrine that has forced the Narendra Modi government at the centre to adopt a very tough stand against Pakistan. It's also the Bajwa doctrine which is now understood that it is the Bajwa doctrine that has spoiled the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Christmas outreach to Pakistan. So what is the Bajwa doctrine? Let's actually take a look at what this doctrine is all about. Now, the Pakistani army chief does understand that there can be no war between India and Pakistan. Now, Bajwa also believes that India is stubborn during the tenure of the Narendra Modi government. There is also Bajwa's belief that India will realise the need for dialogue in perhaps the next 2 to 3 years. This is the assumption and the estimation of Javed Bajwa. The Bajwa has further said that India will have to talk to Pakistan for economic reasons, and that is why, according to Bajwa, Pakistan must wait and keep a watch on India. Essentially, Bajwa doctrine states that India will be compelled to talk to Pakistan because of economic reasons. Now, call it blackmail. It's clear that Bajwa knows that India's prosperity also needs peace at the western border, which is why he believes that Pakistan can actually push terrorists into the Kashmir Valley, and still the Indian government will have to come to the dialogue table. All right, now to discuss what exactly is the Bajwa doctrine and how apt is this as a strategy that's been adopted by Pakistan, we are joined from our newsroom. I'm joined by senior editor Surya Gangadharan. I'm also joined in by Raghavendra Rao from the newsroom as well. Now, Surya, let me begin with you on this. Now, essentially, what Bajwa is putting forth in his doctrine is that due to economic compulsions, India will at some point of time in the near future, perhaps he says in the next 2 to 3 years, will have to come to the talking table. Is that a realistic expectation?
Really know exactly what they're trying to imply through that, you know. I mean, to me, any professional army, when it comes out with a doctrine, it's about strategic and tactical objectives, goals, missions, that kind of thing, you know.
Right.
Here you have a doctrine which is all-encompassing, goes into internal issues, goes into things like democracy, paying lip service to it, frankly, and commenting on all kinds of things that have no relevance at all to a military's actual outlook and objectives.
All right, and let me bring in Raghavendra Rao on this. Raghavendra, the fact that, you know, India and Pakistan have fought 4 wars in the past, the Pakistan realizes that in a conventional, you know, field of warfare, it really stands no chance against India, for which there was this doctrine of a death by 1,000 cuts had in fact been proposed. And this is what Pakistan in fact does whenever it sends infiltrators across the border into India. How is this different from what Pakistan has been doing in the past?
Well, Mohammed, I'm glad you mentioned the philosophy of bleeding India by 1,000 cuts, because yes, that's exactly the thought process which appears to be existing in Pakistan and the Pakistani military's mindset. The fact that over the past couple of decades, we have seen prolonged periods of almost a Cold War-like situation between the two neighbors, but there have been patches in between wherein both countries have decided to keep some contentious issues aside and work on several things, like cross-border contact between people living on the either side, cultural exchanges, and many other things which skirt the key issue of Kashmir and cross-border terrorism. Now, Pakistan, I would not, I'm actually not really surprised by this wait-and-watch policy, because the kind of low-scale conflict which they have been engaging in all across the line of control and the international border in Jammu and Kashmir, it's very clear that there is no let-up in terms of the kind of violence we are witnessing in these areas. We only witness, brief periods of lull in between, but the kind of the numbers of infiltrators and terrorists which are being pushed into J&K from across Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and the manner in which Pakistan keeps on targeting Indian civilian population living in those areas, clearly it's a well thought out strategy. It's a wait and watch game, and it may be a little silly on their part, but yes, they do realize that a conventional war is something neither of these countries would want to engage in, and if that were to happen, obviously India would have an upper hand. But the fact that Pakistan is also now, they also have a nuclear arsenal, so all those things come into the picture. But yes, the fact that they are hoping that India would come to the talking table or would want to get Pakistan to the talking table for economic reasons. Now, these are high hopes as far as they are concerned.
Do you think, Raghvendra, that, Qamar Bajwa, by stating that India will have to be drawn to the talking table perhaps in the next 2 to 3 years for economic compulsions, is he overstating his case here?
Well, absolutely, because as far as economic reasons go, I mean, Pakistan has more to lose than India if the economic relationship between the two countries suffers because of these hostilities which have existed for such a long time. India is not losing as much economically as Pakistan is. So to think that economic reasons would force India to come to the negotiating table, it clearly is, it's just like it's too much of kite flying.
Absolutely, indeed. And Surya, you've been following this story for a very long time. The fact of the matter is, post-Kargil, there was this acceptance from Pakistan that in a full-blown conventional sort of a war scenario, Pakistan really does not stand a chance, for which they resorted to a slightly different tactic. Now, are we seeing a shift away from that, where the military general here is accepting that what Pakistan can at most hope to do is to have these low-intensity conflicts at the border to keep the Kashmir issue burning in the minds of the people in Pakistan, because that is something that he's mentioned in his Bajwa doctrine?
Frankly, Saleh, there is nothing new in this Bajwa doctrine. It is something that Pakistan has thought through over the last 30-odd years, which is why you have an insurgency situation in Kashmir, which is why you have terrorism in Kashmir also.
Right.
These are born from Pakistan's successive failures in conventional battles. So that's why they have resorted to this. This Bajwa doctrine is basically a lot of humbug.
Right.
It's basically meant to tell people in Pakistan that the army is in charge. They're laying down the ground rules for democracy. They're mainstreaming jihadi groups.
Right.
And soon terrorism will be debated in Parliament as any other policy issue. That's what this is about.
But do you think he's addressing something slightly different? Perhaps on the international front it's not very much, but domestically he's also talking about mainstreaming these jihadi and also this terror elements, something which was not spoken about very openly in the civil governments before in Pakistan.
No, that's what I just told you, that they've been mainstreaming jihadis over the last year. And partly this is due to pressure from the US, partly perhaps even pressure from China, because the drive to take on the Haqqani network and all that is perhaps putting pressures on the Pakistani system as perhaps never before. So the Pakistanis need to ensure that their favored jihadi groups are somehow given some kind of immunity. And what's the best way to do it? Make them politicians. Once they're in parliament, they have immunity. So that's what this entire thing is about.
Right. Okay. Let me bring Raghvendra Rao into this. Raghvendra, we've seen India's response every time there is this cross-border infiltration, whenever there's this ceasefire violation that takes place. We see that India has responded. India also had carried out this very famed surgical strike. Now, what should India's response be to this Bajwa doctrine that's been proposed by no less than the Army General, the man who has been calling the shots in Pakistan ever since that he's been there in power?
Well, Mohammed, as Surya rightly pointed out, there is nothing very original or new about what is being talked about as the Bajwa doctrine, because engaging in low-intensity conflicts all along the LOC and the IB, this has been Pakistan's strategy for a long, long time. Right. They realize it fully well that a conventional conflict is something they cannot afford to engage in. and it is through these shoot and scoot measures that they can keep the Kashmir cauldron boiling. So that is what.
Raghavendra, if I could just interrupt you on this, the fact of the matter is, over the course of the last few months, we've seen the number of instances of cross-border infiltration and ceasefire violations that have gone up very sharply. So there is a change in terms of if this is Pakistan's strategy, then this is something that they seem to be embarking upon.
Well, absolutely. And the year 2017, it witnessed an unprecedented number of ceasefire violations. The violations were over 800. Now, that is something that has not really happened in many, many years. Even in the first 3 months of 2018, we have been witnessing a steady rise in the number of ceasefire violations. Conventionally, what used to happen every year was that one would see a heightened terrorist or infiltration activity during the summer months, and it would subside during the winter months. Last year was an aberration, an exception in a way, wherein even during winter months, when many of these passes through which most of these terrorists and infiltrators are pushed in, they are snow covered, and despite the winters and the inclement weather, there was no let up, so to say, in the pushing of infiltrators into Indian territory. So there is a clear escalation, no denying the fact, and India has been retaliating every time they see a ceasefire violation from the Pakistani side. Yes, conventionally what used to happen was that summers one would see a lot of action, one would see a lot of infiltration activity, a lot of infiltration bids. But last year we also must not forget that Indian security forces, they managed to kill over 200 terrorists. Now that also goes on to show the kind of numbers of terrorists and infiltrators who are being pushed from across the border into Jammu and Kashmir. And it is not just foreign terrorists, so to say, who are coming into J&K. The bigger threat which has emerged over the past year is homegrown terror. Now, we have reported on that several times in the past. The fact that over 100 youth from the state of Jammu and Kashmir took to arms, or the security agencies found out during the last year that they had taken to arms in the past couple of years. That is also a very, very worrying sign. And the fact that these foreign terrorists coming into Indian territory and then trying to rope in local youth, now that has added a completely new dimension to this entire low-intensity warfare, so to say, which Pakistan has been engaging in.
Absolutely, indeed. And Surya, let me give you the last word. This doctrine essentially speaks that Pakistan should adopt a wait-and-watch approach, wait for India, driven by economic compulsions, to come to the talking table. What sort of a leverage does India have in this? I mean, we have the Indus River Water Treaty that we would like to renegotiate with Pakistan. So this wait-and-watch approach is in fact something that actually plays in India's favor.
No, the point here is that dialogue is an option that India has exercised with Pakistan for many years, and frankly to no purpose. And unless there is a change in the Pakistani attitude towards India, meaning that the military steps back from its kind of dominance over the polity in Pakistan, you cannot see any point in a dialogue. The army knows this. The army is not interested in dialogue. They are interested in cementing their position in Pakistan, ensuring that their favored allies get into parliament. So this is all about that. This is not about talking to India or about peace with India or trade with India. Army is just not interested. They have to preserve their position in Pakistan. Remember, this is an army that runs a country. So they want to preserve that position, have a veneer of democracy, if you will, but ensure that the army's basic interests are not threatened.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed to both you gentlemen, Surya Gangadharan, and also to Raghavendra Rao for joining us and getting us all those inputs on this interesting story of Bajwa doctrine, but it appears that it is being addressed more to the domestic audience in Pakistan than to try and establish peace with India.
हमारा ये वीडियो कैसा लगा, ये बात हमको कमेंट के जरिए बताते रहें। हमारी चैनल को लाइक करें, शेयर करें और सब्सक्राइब करना